All right, everyone. So this is the team that I have assembled that I consider the top 26 players in terms of their value to trade for in the entirety of Out of the Park live starts at this moment. So I'm going to go from across the lineup and then through the rotation and bullpen for all of these players. So starting from the top left and left field, we have Riley Green, who brings excellent batting skills across the board, incredible defense in the corners, and an overall incredible package for a relatively affordable price. In center field, we have Michael Ciani, who is a solid bat, but really out there for his incredible center field defense and relatively low cost of acquisition. In right field, we have Ronald Acuna Jr., who is one of the better players in out of all of the park baseball. An incredible hitter with solid defense and excellent base running on an affordable contract and surprisingly not expensive to pick up. On third base, we got O'Neill Cruz, incredible third baseman at this point with above average defense and offense and costs nearly nothing to acquire. Edwin Arroyo will be manning shortstop, and he is pretty much MLB ready at under 20 years old with a solid bat and good shortstop defense. He can move to second base, so that is frankly preferable, but is viable at shortstop. At second base, we've got Matt McLain, so you'll notice that all three of the players up the middle, except for catcher, are from the Reds, one of the best teams to make trades with at this point in the OTP cycle. We've also got a number of prospects who are worth trading for that I didn't include because this is not in prospects list. There are no prospects included on this list. Matt McLain is a solid second baseman. Really, there were a lot of options available here since there's no real standouts at second base for talent. But he is a good combination of defense, offense, and upside at the position relative to a lot of the field, bringing the potential to become a solidly above average hitter and the floor of a decent hitter overall. At first base, you got Spencer Torkelson, who's kind of in a similar mold at first base, a slightly above average hitter and decent overall player with a ridiculously low cost of acquisition, but he does have the potential to grow into a solid hitter overall. Manning the DH slot is going to be Nathan Hickley, who is a converted catcher from the Boston Red Sox organization. A very valuable player overall because his bat is very good, comparable to some of the better hitting prospects in the entire game, although he's not valued even close to that capability offensively. Our starting catcher is going to be MJ Melendez, who's been one of my favorites for a while, but now has good hitting ability over defense. But it pays dividends with his captain personality as well, as he becomes one of the most valuable catchers despite a relatively high acquisition price. Manning our bench is going to be Cal Raleigh, the backup catcher, who is similar to MJ Melendez, although a much better fielder at the cost of some offense and not a captain, and a little bit cheaper to acquire. Our infielder is going to be Taylor Walls, who's capable of playing all positions reasonably well, low acquisition price, and a decent bat to boot. Will Benson is going to be our utility outfielder, yet another Cincinnati Red. He brings a solid bat to the table and manageable defense at all three outfield positions. And our super utility is going to be Cavan Biggio, who can play pretty much every position on the field with at least some competency, brings a solid bat to the table, and is also a captain. Now, I also want to mention with this team, this is not just the best players that I consider to be undervalued. It would look a lot different if I were to just select the best from the list. These are the players that I think are the best overall value while also weighing in some general overall talent. So this team is very competitive. In my opinion, this would be easily the best team in an OTP game if you were to run it with this. Granted, fully healthy because there are some critical injuries, for example, to Edwin Diaz, although pretty much him and Crochet are really the only big ones I can think of. Anyways, hang on to the rotation. Topping the rotation is going to be Matt Brash. Now, I do think Max Fried is absolutely better than Matt Brash, although I will admit that the margin is not as big as it probably should be. Matt Brash, to me, is just such an incredible value right now. He is easily a top pitcher in OTP and costs not nearly that to pick up from the Mariners. He's just a ridiculously valuable player at the moment. Our starting pitcher number 2 is going to be Max Fried, and he is one of the better pitchers in all of OTP and doesn't quite cost it. Another Brave. There are a lot of valuable Braves to trade for. He certainly is at the top of the list with Acuna, two very talented players that are not quite their price. to pick up. Aaron Ashby's going to be manning the third spot in our rotation. He is a surprisingly quite good pitcher this year from the Milwaukee Brewers. He is injured to start the year, so that is another injury to this roster that would bring some issues about. But once healthy, he's a very valuable pitcher and on a quite team-friendly contract to boot, while not being expensive by any means to acquire from the Brewers. In fact, he sometimes is even a negative value. The next guy is negative value to acquire. Eduardo Rodriguez, yet another Tiger. You'll notice a lot of them on this list as well. And he should be starting pitcher 4. Starting pitcher 3 is a typo. Erod is probably about a fair contract, but considered by the Tigers to be absolutely atrocious. Getting Riley Green is a whole lot easier when you're making a deal that includes Eduardo Rodriguez. And in the starting pitcher 5 slot, I couldn't decide between Clark Schmidt and Nabil Crismat. Both are insanely cheap to acquire. They're up there with Ashby, who is probably the best value to acquire in terms of being ridiculously cheap starting pitchers out there. Both guys are high-end middle rotation to upper rotation even type starting pitchers that cost near nothing to acquire. They're cheap to hold. They're very valuable players. Now, the relief core is different. It's kind of a mix of guys who are ridiculously cheap to pick up and also very high quality relievers, and then some guys who are more expensive and considered horribly net negative values by their teams respectively. So first on this list is going to be the closer, Edwin Diaz. In my opinion, Diaz is the best reliever and out of the park right now. He brings dominant stuff and very high movement to the table with very solid control as well. His contract is expensive, but frankly not that much given his talent. The big downside is that he is out for pretty much the entire first season with an injury, but the Mets will treat him horribly and allow you to get some high-value players like Brett Beatty or Kodai Senga for relatively cheap in addition to Diaz if you are to trade for him. Second on this list is Jalen Beeks of the Tampa Bay Rays, who is also a perfectly capable starting pitcher. He brings excellent stuff, solid movement and control to the table. He's cheap to acquire. He is obviously good stamina, which is desirable for a starting or a high-end reliever. Very solid option. The second setup guy is going to be Raisel Iglesias of the, once again, Atlanta Braves, who makes getting guys like Acuna and Fried a whole lot easier because they absolutely despise him, despite being a perfectly good high-leverage reliever. Iglesias brings solid stuff, movement, and control to the table at a slightly overpriced contract, but not too bad overall. Our first middle reliever is going to be Brian Abreu of the Houston Astros. He brings excellent stuff and movement to the table and slightly lower control. He can transition to the rotation just like Jalen Beeks if you desire. Otherwise, he's a really dominant reliever who costs next to nothing to pick up. Also from the Astros is Ryan Presley, who they absolutely despise in a similar situation to Raisel Iglesias. Very high stuff movement and control. Contract's a little bit longer, but ultimately a very similar situation. Alex Lange will be our third middle reliever, yet another Detroit Tiger. Very low cost of acquisition. He's not quite enough stamina to be a starting pitcher in the eyes of OTP, but with just a tiny boost, he can be a solid middle rotation starter as well. But in the meantime, provides solid middle relief or even upper tier relief with high stuff and movement. Fourth middle reliever is going to be Garrett Crochet, who costs near nothing to acquire from the White Sox. He is injured at the start, but with dominant stuff and movement and room to grow, potentially even into a starting pitcher, he is one of the better values to target right now. And last is the long reliever Michael King, who brings dominant stuff and solid movement and control. Like a lot of other relievers on this list, he too could become a starting pitcher with a little bit of a stamina boost. But even as he stands, he's still one of the stronger relievers in the game with very quality pitches and overall high-end talent and a low price of acquisition. So as for this list as a whole, I would say the only truly expensive players to acquire are probably Riley Green, Ronald Acuna, and Max Fried. Almost everyone else on this list can be had relatively affordably, and I would bet if you have the money to do it, you can probably build this team. Maybe if you like substitute out Edwin Diaz, perhaps Ryan Presley with some cheaper relievers, you could build this exact team in a live OTP start with relative ease, probably with some talent left over. Now, this list, I have to emphasize, does not cover prospects. This list does not cover a whole lot of other undervalued players that I just thought were not quite good enough to make the cut. In particular, relievers and third basemen. there are a whole lot of those guys. Starting pitchers, too, frankly. There's a lot of starting pitchers that got left out of this list that are perfectly high end guys. I mean, frankly, the worst on this list, starting pitcher talent, probably Eduardo Rodriguez, and I consider him a viable number 3 starting pitcher. So ultimately, this team is really good. OTP has a whole lot of holes in its talent evaluation right now, so if you're looking to exploit them, it will not be particularly difficult. If you guys want, let me know if you're interested in this. I can make another similar video to this where I go over the top 26 players, but it's prospects instead for undervalued players. Um, since this list obviously covers almost entirely major league players, I would say the one exception is probably Edwin Arroyo, but even that's not that much of a stretch since I would be fine starting him as a shortstop if I had to. Anyways, I hope this was helpful for you guys. Let me know again if you would like that video. If not, you can watch my other videos that are much longer, of course, and I'll see you on the next one.